My name is Erin. I'm the trainings coordinator at SAFER, Students Active for Ending Rape. We're based in New York City, but we're a national nonprofit organization dedicated to working with student activists looking to reform the sexual assault policy and programming at their school to build a safer community. We look at sexual assault policies for a lot of reasons, and today we're going to talk about the tone and definitions of those policies and the impact that they have on creating a culture of consent and also impacting the experience of survivors when they go to utilize the policy at their school. This is part of a 4-video series that we'll be releasing over the next 2 months as part of really launching a campaign to improve and update policies on campus. These campaigns usually start with an analysis of what's already happening on campus. You can't fight for change if you don't know what's already going on. So we utilize the Campus Accountability Project and the policies database to really start a campaign in a smart way, making sure that we understand what's already in place and on the ground before we start fighting. We know what you're against. We know that we want campuses that are rape-free and that support the experiences of anyone who do experience sexual assault. Every school in the United States that receives federal funding is required to have a sexual assault policy. That doesn't mean that that policy is good or effective or comprehensive or meets the needs of survivors, but there's one at your school. So dig it up and take a strong look at it with us. Today we're going to start looking at the tone and definitions that your policy utilizes. Usually I'm going to start with this. When we hear the word policy, we think of dry, dull, boring, stuck in a drawer and you only pull it out when it's an emergency. SAFER is trying to change the way that student activists think about policy. We think that policy is a dynamic, working document that should reflect the needs of that community. That's a different stance. It's also a document that should be really rooted in prevention, a commitment to prevention on campus. And that's a concept that this movement is really starting to get its claws into. Prevention-based policy means that the school is focusing on what healthy relationships look like, what consensual sex looks like, and providing comprehensive definitions and programs for students to utilize this in their everyday life, so that sexual violence isn't something that's swept under the rug, isn't something that's shameful or rare on a community, but something that is acknowledged that it happens everywhere, it can happen to anyone, and actually anyone can perpetuate sexual violence. That's a completely different stance than what we typically see in old school policies that maybe even gender potential victims as she and her and potential perpetrators as he and him. One of the most simple and yet impactful things that you can do with your policy is to gender neutralize it, and also go one step beyond that and make sure that people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or gender variant are explicitly included in services and programs on campus. That means that male survivors, that means that no matter what your background is or who you sleep with and who you love, you could be a survivor of sexual violence. You could also be a perpetrator of sexual violence on campus. It's scary to think that anyone could be impacted by this, but we know it's true, and the statistics are startling. However, the tone of a policy doesn't need to come from a place of fear. It doesn't need to come from a place of just prohibiting sexual violence. We can actually take a proactive and positive stance against sexual violence by building a community that's based on mutual respect and listening and consent. Consent is the key element to an effective, comprehensive sexual assault policy. A comprehensive definition of consent includes one that is temporal, meaning that consent needs to be renewed every act, every time. It's a consent definition that is not based on assumptions, and it's not a one-time green light for the parties involved, meaning that consent needs to be renewed even in relationships. Now that's an idea that doesn't always get put down in paper, especially in sexual assault policies, but it's related to also prevention of dating violence on campus. When we talk about comprehensive definitions of consent, we're also talking about comprehensive definitions of sexual violence. We know that sexual violence happens on a continuum of experiences, from forcible touching or unwanted commentary to completed rape. When we talk about consent on a continuum or nuanced consent, we talk about whether that action or even gesture, even commentary, is wanted by the person receiving it. And that means that it's the responsibility of the initiator to obtain consent before they move forward with that action. So let's look at definitions of sexual assault on campus. Sexual assault is an umbrella term that covers a full range of different behaviors, from sexual harassment to forcible touching to a completed rape. The important part here is to really name these things and go beyond prohibiting them to a place where we're able to hold individuals accountable for perpetuating this behavior on campus, and also for the school actually taking action against folks who are perpetrating behavior on campus. This means that things aren't getting brushed under the rug or tied up in endless investigation processes. But there's a clear definition of what the prohibited behavior is, and also clear protocols for what will happen next. We're going to be covering that in a later video. But the important part here is to ensure that anyone can be a survivor of sexual violence and anyone can be a perpetrator of sexual violence. And the key component is that that person's consent was violated. A definition of consent, again, is key to defining sexual violence on campus. And sexual violence needs to be defined on a continuum of experience, because that's what we know is happening out there. So let's take a second and actually step back from the more detailed work of looking at definitions and take a strong look at the tone that the policy sets, whether it's a more passive approach or active approach. When you see a policy that's on the passive end of things, you'll see phrases like not tolerated or not condoned. That sends a message that sexual violence just happens. A sexual assault policy that takes a more proactive or just active approach to the issue is one that states that it will actively prevent unsafe or hostile behavior on campus and the people who are perpetrating that behavior on campus. That's something that is complicated, but it's something that starts with that very first sentence when someone goes to read the policy on whether something is not tolerated or actively prevented on campus. And when it does happen, the school takes swift and reasonable action to make sure that that survivor feels safe again on campus. So we covered a lot of ground already in this video around the tone and definitions of a policy, the impact that has on shaping the culture on campus, and also the experience of a survivor when they go to utilize the policy. We hope that you will take this video as inspiration for actually starting your policy analysis at the Campus Accountability Project on our website, safercampus.org, and taking a strong look at what your school is already doing and the things that it could be doing to prevent and respond to sexual violence on campus in a more effective way.